Welcome to week 8 of CP130, iPhone development. And so I am Sean Larson. My day job is an iOS developer at Nordstrom, and my side job is what I'm doing right now, part of the iOS certification program for the UW. I'm also on the advisory committee as well. And I always have to include my shameless plug. I'm also the author of iOS Internationalization, the complete guide, which you can pick up in multiple quantities, wherever fine books are sold. So what we want to talk about this week, hopefully what I will relay to you and teach you this week, is going to be working with localization and internationalization and explain what the difference is between those two. And then we're going to talk about accessibility. So who has worked with localization before, or translation? Okay. And in what capacity? What did you do?
This was in Windows.
Okay.
Basically formatting strings in such a way that we could add in localized words.
Okay. You had your hand up?
Multiple projects. There was some language key and translation service. And long time ago, I worked on small talk.
Okay. And you had your hand up?
Oh yeah, documentation and strings in SQL Server.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to share what they worked on? Okay. So as far as what I've worked on, prior to working at Nordstrom, I was a tester and an SDET at Microsoft, and I worked on the Mac Office product. And we had to support, I think, 30 different languages, and part of our job was to not necessarily translate, but to ensure that when we changed to a different language that everything was laid out correctly. We wouldn't necessarily know what we were clicking, but we knew, well, if I choose format character, that's the third one down from the menu, so I click that and look for any kind of truncation or layout or any kind of problems, and of course, if it would cause any crashes as well. And the side story I wanted to share, I was at Microsoft for 15 years, and like I said, I was a tester and an SDET for Mac Word, and I had a colleague honestly ask me last week if he had a form that they had drawn out for doing phone screens for our interviews, and he wanted to create that layout in Word, and he honestly asked me, he says, would you be able to help me with Mac Word? And at the time I bent over laughing, saying, yeah, I can't help you with it then. Nobody can. Okay. So talking about when we're localizing an app, and specifically what the difference is between internationalization and localization, a lot of times you'll see them abbreviated like this. And so that's going to be an L, the number 10, so 10, and then an N to represent localization, and then I, the number 18, and an N to represent internationalization. And you want to think of these as a, if I can pronounce it, a numeronym, meaning, and another example would be like the letter K and then the number 9 to represent the word canine. So internationalization is designing an app so it works in multiple places or locales without engineering changes. So what that means is you basically write the code once and you let the code take care of layout and formatting. And I'll go into this in a lot more detail, so that all the user needs to do is switch to a different language, switch to a different locale, and it knows how to properly represent the UI and properly represent information. Whereas localization, for the most part, you want to think about that as working with strings and working with translations. So if you're describing something with text, or you're describing something with a label, that it shows the appropriate term for that depending on the language that was set and the region that the user is using it in. So why would you want to spend time? Because for most software development companies, it's just like get it done as fast as possible. Let's get that feature done, let's get that project done, and then move on to the next one. And when you're adding to the schedule, that's when red flags can be raised. But if you do it correctly, you only have to do it once. It only adds not that much time to the schedule, and then you never have to go back again. A lot of times if you, let's say you start off by supporting just 3 languages, if you've implemented the code properly, that when you add the 4th language, the 5th language, it will just automatically support that, and you don't need to go back and like work with like a case statement or work with nested ifs, like if the language is set to Japanese, then do this, refer to these files. If it's German, then do this. It's just automatically taken care of for you. So it'll also help you to expand your market, remain competitive, and really generate goodwill with foreign customers. The stat I always like to call out is, I don't know how popular it is now, but there was a really popular iOS game, Bomb Beach. And what they found is once they localized their game to support Japanese and then to have it, I want to say, called out within the Japanese specific app store, and when customers saw that there was not just the game, but the game that supported their language and their region settings, they actually saw an increase in download and increase in sales of 60%. And I want to say, just by supporting Japanese, like I said, there is overhead, but once you get that set up, it's a great use of your resources. It's a great investment that can easily pay off. So what you want to localize, again, we're talking about strings, we're talking about translation. So anywhere you have text, so that could be labels, that could be buttons, that could be menu items, what have you, any place that you have strings or hard-coded strings. You also want to consider images as well. This kind of falls into the gray area of localization and internationalization, but you want to use appropriate images and images that make sense. And then also resources outside the app, so any help documents you have, those need to be localized so that they make sense to the person that's using them. And then also websites. A lot of times, when you're working with a mobile app, you're going to call an API, you're going to hit an endpoint, and you're going to call on a web service. And for the most part, it would just be an endpoint specific for the language. So if the language is English, you'd hit an English endpoint. If it's German, you'd hit a German endpoint. Okay. Any questions so far? So what do you want to internationalize? And that's really going to be the significant difference between internationalization and localization is when you internationalize your app, that's going to be within the code as opposed to working with a separate resource file, a strings file that's going to have your terms and their specific translations. Internationalization is going to be within the code. You're going to make sure that you use number formatters, date formatters, time zone formatters, so that it will go, so the system will handle that and the system will represent the correct data. Also, you're going to be working with text direction under the internationalization umbrella. And what we're talking about there is languages that go from left to right and right to left. And the 2 typical examples for the right to left languages are going to be Hebrew and Arabic. And that's really what you need to support as far as an iOS device. There are also, I know specifically with Japanese, you also need to support vertical text as well. A lot of times that's how it'd be, what's that?
Top to bottom.
Top to bottom, thank you. But the iOS operating system doesn't support that. And we'll get into this in more detail as well, but as far as supporting the text direction, you would do that through auto layout and do that through your constraints. And like I said, we'll get into that more in detail. And then you also want to consider images and if they're locale appropriate. And I put my favorite example up there. So it's really easy, like especially if you're using kind of a fun app or maybe in a kid's app and you're using images to represent words, you might have a picture of a bee and then the word smart after that. So be smart or be intelligent or what have you. But that's definitely could be considered a colloquialism and it could not be translated correctly. In fact, instead of be smart, it might be translated as intelligent insect, which is not the point, not the context that you were trying to make at all. So to get into some specifics, what we'll be working with are called locale identifiers, and those are basically just a 5-character code. The first 2 characters are going to be going to represent the language, and then you're going to have an underscore. That's just the typical syntax. And then the last 2 letters are typically, and it follows this case as well. The first 2 letters are going to be lowercase. The second letters are going to be uppercase, and that's going to represent the region. And those are 2 separate settings that you can do on the device, and I'll demo that as well. And just like I have up on the slide, that's how you want to read it. So the language is set to English and the region is set to US. And these can be mix and match as well. I have a lot of colleagues that actually grew up in Ireland and they're in the US working. And so they'll have the region settings to US, so they have the right time zones and date formats and things like that, but the actual language would be set to Irish or even French or what have you. And I've got that represented on this one. So here the language would be set to English and the region would be set to German. And when you're working with regions, that's going to affect how dates are going to be displayed. It's going to affect how time's going to be displayed. Do we need to display an AM or a PM? With dates, do we show the day first and then the month and then the year and things like that? Okay. And then also we can be even more specific like the example I have here. So that is the language is set to Chinese, and in this case the Hans represented there is actually signifying that we're working with simplified Chinese as opposed to traditional Chinese, and then the region set to China as well, with CN representing China. Okay. Any questions on that? So when we add localization support to our project, and I'll be demoing this, what Xcode automatically sets up for us are specific localizable bundles. And the naming for those bundles are going to be the language that we chose. So the first 2, the bundle name it'll start with 2 letters that represent the language and then .lproj. And these will be separate folders. And then anything that go into those folders will be used when we change the language within our app. So what we're going to find there is we're going to have a .strings file that's going to hold our translations, and that's going to be for both strings within our code as well as strings within our UI elements, those being either storyboards or zips, and we can control what text gets displayed there. Now there's a special bundle that's called base.lproj, and what that gives you is base localization, and anything that goes into there, if you haven't specified a language that you'll support, like if you haven't specified Finnish and the user sets their language to Finnish, what your app will do will look towards the base LProj bundle and then use the resources there. Now, by default, this is set to your development language. So if you're doing your development in English, essentially you'll have the same resources in your English bundle and in the base bundle as well.
So is this like properties?
They're actually, no, they're actually, what do you mean by properties?
English key properties things in this resource.
It's a project setting, and that's where we'll make that change. So it's not really a property, and it's not a property that you would set in code, anything like that. So you set it up within the project settings, and then once you do that, Xcode will create within the Finder separate folders for all your resources to go into.
Still within the same project.
Yes. Yeah. So within those bundles are going to be .string files, and they by default are called localizable .strings, and they will be contained within each bundle, within each folder, and that's where we can make the changes. That's where we can add the specific translations for the languages that we're working with. And they're set up quite like a dictionary, where you'll have a key and then a value for that key. And you'll also be able to set up with optional comments. And the reason why you want to do comments is you're going to have these string files, and they're going to reference display elements, and then you're basically going to blindly hand these off to a translation service, or if you have an in-house translation service, and they need to know what the context is going to be. You think you could just use Google Translate, right? So it's just like, okay, I'm talking about a dog, so I'll just look up dog in Spanish and then go from there, and then I need the translation for jump, and then the translation for over, and then fence, and I'm good to go, right? Just word for word translation. It's like that doesn't work, because what you sound like is an idiot in another language, because it's not the word that's king, but it's the sentence. So you have to have a whole sentence. They have to have context, and it's that sentence, the meaning of the sentence that gets translated, not the words that are within that sentence. So you want to include comments as well as the strings that you're working with, so that when your assignment is given to the translator, they'll have an idea. Oh, okay, so this is what they're talking about. And I can appreciate that I'm just throwing words at you right now, and maybe even a little bit of a fire hose, but once we get into the demos, it'll make more sense. Oh, the other thing I wanted to call out is that these string files are just plain text files. There's nothing unique about them at all, other than they're old school. And by that, I mean each entry that you have, and each line will start with a key and then what the value of that key is, and it does need to end with a semicolon, which we really don't need when we're working with Swift. Okay. So we have these string files, and they work with the strings within our source files, as well as any strings that we have in our UI elements. So any labels that we've set up, any button titles that we have, we want to localize those as well. Now within our source code, when we have a hard-coded string, we'll want to wrap it in the NS localized string macro. And that has two arguments to it. The first one being the name of the key, and then the second argument being the comment that you want to include to the translator. Now as far as our UI elements, as far as the zip and the storyboard, we don't need to do anything special to them. We don't need to use the NS localized string macro. That's just within our source file. We do get a .string file generated when we're working in relation to our UI elements. And what Xcode will do is it will give each one of those entries a unique key. It will be, I always like to think of it as a GUID, and then it'll have what the value of that is, basically what your label is displaying or what your button title is displaying and things like that.
Is it automatically updated when we add
Is it automatically updated? No, unfortunately, it's not. It's not. So that's where it can get tedious. So if you know, let's say you're 50% done with your project, and it's okay. Let's get the localization set up, and so you'll run the command that parses through your source code, looks for the NS localized string macro, that will generate your strings file. So if you need to make any changes to that, you either need to do it manually, like if you've added more entries within your source code.
No, I'm talking about storyboard related.
With storyboards, it's going to be the same. So if you've got a view controller and you've got 3 labels on it, and then you generate the strings file, so it'll identify those labels, give them a unique identifier, and then also include the value to those identifiers. And then if you add 2 more, so you have a total of 5, you need to you'll need to rerun it, and it'll actually create it from scratch. It won't append the 2 new labels to the existing 3.
And does it automatically delete when I delete the label?
Let's find out. Let's find out. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that it would overwrite the existing strings file, but we can find out for sure on that. And talked about this a little bit. Oh, actually, no, I didn't talk about this. So considering strings and auto layout, what we're talking about here is the length of the string. So typically, when you have an English word, it's going to be much longer and larger when you're dealing with German translations. And so I've got a couple examples there. I do not know how to pronounce this. So is there anybody out there? But nice, thank you. So that's the German equivalent to the English word speeding. So as you can see, it's maybe 4 times as long. So those are the types of things you need to take into consideration when you're designing your app, when you're laying it out. And you want to take full advantage. I know Boris talked about this last week. You want to take advantage of the intrinsic content size. And so by doing that, when you change the language to German, it will be laid out correctly. Now, some other things you'd need to take into consideration is if you had another label on the same line, and you'd probably need to definitely work with constraints, probably work with inequalities. It's like who has the higher priority, who should be displayed completely, and then who would it be okay to display truncated, things like that. Okay. And I did talk about working with left to right and right to left languages. And when you have taken the time and done your design through auto layout and through constraints, setting up a leading constraint and a trailing constraint, it will go from left to right for most languages, and then when you switch to right to left, it will flip it and be correctly. It'll lay out correctly with no extra effort on your part. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Okay, so what I've got set up here is just a real simple project. I've got 3 labels that I'm working with. The first one is, so the first one is hard-coded, and you want to avoid hard-coded strings at all costs. The second 2 are going to be set programmatically. And then I've also got an image here I've got set up as well. So if we go ahead and run this, this is the next section. So let me just turn that off right now. Okay, so there's my app. So I've got 2 strings, I've got a number that I'm working with, and then I've got an image as well. So now this is set up, the system is set up to run into English, and so everything we see there is in English. If I were to change the language to German, it would display exactly the same. And so we don't want to have that. So the first thing I'm going to work on is going to my source code and looking for any hard-coded strings I have there, and then I'll wrap them in my NS localized string macro. So I'll go to my view controller.
Is there an NS localized attributed string?
No, because it's just working with text files, and it's just working with text. So once you pull in that localized text and then you have that data, then you can format it. So I've got my text here, so I'll go ahead and wrap that. Oops. Now, as you can see, this has 2 arguments, the first one being the key and the second one being the comment. And as you know, with Swift, we don't need to use the first name parameter, so I'll just put the value I'm going to put there, and then for the comment, so try to give some context to the localizer as they look through this. Okay, so that's set up. Now the next thing, actually I apologize, I'm a little bit out of order, but not too bad. The first thing you want to do is go to your project file and then include what languages you want to localize to. So I chose the project and then the project here, and then right here is where I've got the localization section.
Can you make that bigger?
Yes,
And are you recording?
I am recording. Okay. And so you just go ahead and click on the plus sign. And these are the languages that iOS supports. We've got quite a few. You can add and at this point you can really add as many as you want to. It's not going to affect anything. It's not going to bloat your project or anything like that. So you might consider, when you're initially working on a project or working on a feature, it's just like, we hope to support 12 languages. Go ahead and add them at the time. If it ends up you only do 3, it's no big deal. But for right now, I just want to choose German. And then, so what it's doing is it's automatically looking at any UI elements I have in the project. And right now, I just have the 2 storyboards, the main storyboard and then the launch screen storyboard. And it's like, yeah, I want to go ahead and localize those. And then what we'll find is now the storyboards have this disclosure triangle with them. And it took me, okay, maybe it was only 5 minutes, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what to call the disclosure triangle. So thankfully I remembered. And you'll notice that we've got our base localization and we've got our German localization as well. Now I want to blatantly include an English localization as well. So to do that, you want to select the storyboard and then zoom out and bring up the inspector pane. And if you look at the the file inspector, it has a localization section as well. So I want to go ahead and include English localization as well. So I just check that. And then you'll notice that I have an English listing here as well. And then I'll do the same to the main storyboard, just like that. Okay, so now we have our .strings file, and then if we take a look at it, you'll see we have, it starts off with a comment, and then this is the GUID that I talked about, so it's unique identifier, and then it's the value or the translation for this language. So this is what will display when the language is set to English, and this is what will display when the language is set to German. So we need to make a change there, and I'll go ahead and do that. Notice that it took the current value of what the label is right now, so that's why we're seeing that there. And since these will be set programmatically, I don't need to worry about that within this strings file. Because this strings file is specific to the UI and what displays in the UI. So basically it's hard-coded in the UI, and that's what we'll see there. I'm assuming this is correct German. Try that. Okay. Now, okay. So please hang on tight. We need to localize this, and I'll go ahead and do that with the inspector pane. Maybe I won't. Okay. I won't do that. What I'll actually do is, okay, I need to edit this part of the video. So we're working with source files. We're working with our source code, and we've got our NS localized string macro there. Now we need to run a separate tool outside of Xcode for it to parse through our source code and then create our .strings file. And the name of that is called genstrings. And you want to do that from terminal. And let's see where I am. So I need to so I could either list out the path that I want to go to, or I could actually go to the path. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to where my source files are located, and then I want to generate strings. Oops, strings. Okay, so it's a built-in command that's available. We have different options there. We really don't need to worry about those right now. We just need to run this on our source code so that it'll parse through and then create our strings file. So first of all, you can see there are currently there's no .strings file that's there. So I'll run genstrings on the view controller source file, and now if we look, we have our localizable strings file. Okay, so that's one of the manual steps that we need to do. And there are other tools available. There's several of them that I know of that are on GitHub that make this a lot easier, but this is what they're doing underneath the hood to do this. And then we can go ahead and take a look at the file, and we'll see that it's just a text file. So you notice that it parsed out the comment that I added, and then by default it takes the name of the key and gives it the same value. So that's why we're seeing it repeated there. The actual text that I used was a hello world, and then it uses that as the value and the key as well. So now I need to add this to the project. So I'll go ahead and open it in Finder. And it's right there. So I can, and you'll notice here are the bundles that I talked about, the .lproj, and with the different languages, including base. I'll go ahead and copy those. Actually, I'm going to try what I was trying to do originally, and then I'll add this to the project. Say yes, copy it. Okay, so now it's part of the project, and now I should be able to localize it. There we go. So what this does is it saves me the step from manually copying it to the other lproj bundles. And this will put them in there for me. And of course it's the same. So one of the first things I can do is to translate this. And now, let me go to the simulator, and then I'll change the language, and you'll find that under General, and then Language and Region, and this works exactly the same on the simulator as it does on an actual device. So now, slight commentary I have to say here. So this is a nice addition that Apple has added for iOS, letting you know what languages you've used, but it's just a list. So it's like, okay, that's nice, but so to actually change it, I have to go here, and then, you know, depending on what I want, I'll have to scroll through. Or I could search, so if my keyboard would work. Okay. So I want to choose Deutsch, and then done. And then say yes, change to German. And so you really want to think it's not a full reboot, but it's enough of a change to the system that if you've got any apps running, they'll be killed. So now you can see that we've got a number of changes here. The most obvious one, everything is now in German, including our controls and our button labels. Notice that the time is not AM, PM, but a 24-hour clock. So that's being represented. And now, if we launch our app, we'll see that those have both been changed. Remember that the top one was hard-coded in the storyboard, and I made the change here. So that's why it's displaying in German. And then within our source code, because this is wrapped in our NS localized string macro, that got changed as well. Okay. So that's nice, but we could make this a lot smarter. Rather than using our English string as the name of our key, it'd be a lot smarter to have to use a constant instead. So we might do something like, so that's more of a generalized key name, and then what the value of it is represented there. So we need to make that change everywhere. Because we changed the name of our key, and then also within our source code as well. So by doing that, we actually add a little context right into our source code, and we actually make it self-documenting as well. So it's like, what is this supposed to be? Oh, this is the greeting text. So then that makes a lot more sense than hello world. It's just like, you know, why are we saying hello? Is there a reason what the context is? This gives us context. So now if we rerun it, hopefully nothing's changed. Okay, so there we go. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. So now we can do the same thing with our images as well. We can localize those. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and localize this. So I've chosen my ping, and then I'm going to localize that. And I'll start with base, and then add English and German. Okay. So now we've got another manual process to do. We can do that from Finder. And let me close some of these here. So within our project, we've got our base right there, and then German, and then English as well. So I'm going to replace the map.ping in the German resource and in the English resource as well. And it does need to be the same name, even though it's going to be a different file. Okay. So I'll copy German, English. And then English. Get rid of that and rename this. And I don't need to manually add these to the project. They're just part of the resource file, and then those will get read in. So you recall the last time I ran this that we just had the picture of Earth. And again, I'm still running under German. But now when I run it, I've got that, I have a map of Germany. And then we can stop. Switch the language back to English. Oh, sorry.
So not all of the UI is localized.
Yeah, I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Simulator bug?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. So I'll go back to English. And our image is changed. Okay. So any questions on that? It's a bit labor intensive, especially having to go out to terminal and either switch to the directory that has your source files, or you could include the path to it as well. I just chose, it was just easier to demonstrate going into that directory, make it the active directory, and then running the genstrings file, or genstrings command from there.
If you added more NS localized strings, you would just rerun gen strings?
Yes, exactly. So let's actually take a look at that. Demoing on the fly, always a dangerous thing. Okay, I should get a warning that that's not used. And then if I wrap that,
The image name
yes,
is the same.
yes.
So dictionary to refer to different images.
Correct. Correct. Because it's just looking for that resource. And the reason why, you probably could, but the way I've set it up is I'm looking for a specific image name. So that's why it has to be the same. You could probably either set up a dictionary. Actually, you could do that. Now you got me thinking. You would, you could have. You got me thinking too much. I've got too many ideas going on. So we're working with a default localizable.strings file because that's what gets generated from the genstrings command. So that's the default. You can have your own custom tables, your own custom .strings files. So we could have an images.strings file or a graphics.strings file. And then when we wanted to refer to a specific name for a specific language, like you recall I had map-en and map-de. We could have different entries for those and then specify, okay, so I just need to pull a value here. I will give you the key, and then we could also reference an individual table and then pull from there. So actually, yes, you could. It would just take some extra effort to set that up.
That would be less confusing if it's not the same.
Yeah, exactly, and you'd be a lot less prone to overwriting an image that you didn't mean to, because it has the same name, so it'd be very easy to do. So yeah. Thank you. Good question.
One other note: there's no man page for GenString.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Just give it a dash help. It's an Apple thing.
Oops.
Yeah.
Oh,
I wish they would standardize on that. It's driving me nuts. If you just type GenStrings, it'll be.
yeah, but it says there's a man page, but there isn't.
please see GenString's man page for full documentation. Interesting.
Follow reader.
Yeah.
I think you should follow these for having the underscore, like map underscore en be accepted as well as map. You know,
Oh.
if you could just decorate your image name with
Mhm.
underscore and then the locale.
Yeah.
I mean, that would solve his problem. You know, have it
Right.
accepted to one.
It's actually I caused my own problem because I'm saying I want a UI image with that name. So I caused my own problem. So it's only going to look for that file name.
Just pass it a localized string instead.
Yeah.
And then treat those names as
Yeah.
the German version of the map.
That should work fine. Yeah. So yeah, replace that with the NS localized string macro. Yeah. Because that's all it's returning is a string. And then based on the languages that we've added to localize, yeah, that should work fine. So here I am standing in front of you saying don't use hard-coded strings. And I went and did it myself. So now what I want to do is rerun GenStrings. That.
When we use localization on storyboard, do we have to add the language after finishing up the UI?
Do you have to add the?
I just
That would be the best approach. So if you've got everything laid out correctly, and then you could add the localization. So it would kind of eliminate any extra steps you need to do. So you've got all the steps set up for the layout in the UI. Then you do the next step to add the localization, and then you would add the translations.
I just tried to add localization first and modify the storyboard, and it didn't add anything when I did
Okay,
So
look,
it's like it's not build phase, it's just at the time when we add the language specifically on the project.
yes, yeah. Oh, okay, we'll take a look at that at the break. So you see here so it generated a brand new localizable strings when I ran the genstrings command, and I would need to add this new file to the project to get those new entries within there, because it doesn't modify the existing one. You can see there.
But it kind of,
So we override your changes too then.
yeah,
If you dumped in this on top of your German one, you lose your German text.
and it
Yes.
gets rid of your.
Yeah.
You gotta
your
deal with the
actual-
merging every time you create new ones.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's GitHub project to fix that.
Yeah.
Probably
Yes.
cool.
So what he's saying is I made this modification for my key name, and if I've added new entries and then generated a new .strings file, oh, it actually appended. Oh no, no, it didn't, because we see here, so that's what I have in the source file now. So yeah, it did override. Right here. So it said, oh yeah, okay, here's the macro, and then there's the key in the entry. So what actually overrode was my translation, which is right here. Should be hello world. So yeah, there's a lot of good things and a lot of helpful things, and a lot of things to be aware of. Now you don't. So if you've got a big project, and let's say you've got hundreds of entries here, you don't need to rerun the gens file. This is just a text file, so you can just add a new entry. Then it just needs to end with the semicolon. So you can manually add them as well. That's fine. So within the source code, if we had any kind of key like that, it would pull this in and then display that string. Does that make sense?
Except for the semicolon.
Exactly. Okay. Now there's another option as well. I think it's a little more bit of trivia than anything else. So one thing you saw the way I could test this was within the simulator, changing the system language to see how it would reflect. Another way that's available is if you go back to the project file, where's it, the target? If you go to the target, excuse me, and then click on the info. No, wait a minute. I need options. Oh, I'm sorry. Ugh. Okay. If we look at the scheme for our project and then we edit that scheme, within there we have options, and there we can set what we want the application language to be. So within this project, I said let's localize for English and German. So you can choose that here, and regardless of what your system is set for, that's the language that your app will run in. So right now my system is set to English, but if I change that to English, if I modify the scheme to run in German, then that's the localization that it'll use.
So make a German scheme and an English scheme, and then you can easily look at the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the pseudo-language stuff is interesting because you could test, like, you could test your UI before you actually localize it.
Exactly. So what we're talking about here are these entries for pseudo language, and actually let's just set that up. So what this is just that it's a pseudo language. A lot of times it's used for testing the length of strings, and an easy way to test the length of strings and see if it would be truncated or cut off or not displayed correctly. Now again, I'm demoing on the fly, so this could be interesting. But again, that's a change I made to the scheme. So that's what. So what it's actually done is it actually used the English language, but it doubled the string. So it's a nice quick way to determine, give you a nice quick test for the length of the strings, see how they display, and see if anything is truncated. And it just worked with the strings that are available in that were defined within the .strings file. Okay. How are we doing? Do we want to take a break? Okay, I'll keep going. Then I can wrap up internationalization. Then we'll take a break and we'll go to accessibility. So any other questions on this project?
You're gonna do numbers?
Yes. Yeah. So the first locale class, and this has got it's got lots and lots of properties available to it that tell you specifics about the locale, and this is going to that's one of the features that's available with the locale class. The other thing it allows you to do is to specify, or I'm sorry, let me back up. You can create an instance of the NSLocale class, and part of initializing that is to specify a locale that you want to use. And you would use the locale identifier. So like if you wanted to set up for an English locale, you would say en_US. And the reason why you'd want to do this, and we actually do it at Nordstrom, is that once you set up a locale, once you specify that, then you can use that with your formatter classes. So like your date formats and your number of formats. And the way that we take advantage of it is the Nordstrom iPhone app only supports one language, and that's English US. And we will set up an NS number formatter for a currency format. And by doing that, when we make a call to the API and then when we get a return value from our web service, they don't need to format it. We don't need to parse a string to determine. It's like, okay, so let's pre-append a $sign to it because we're working with the US, and then make sure that there's a space, and then do we have more than 4 digits? Okay, so we'll want to include a comma for 1,000 separator, and on and on and on. All we need to have returned back to us is a number, and then we'll worry about the formatting. And then when you work with a number formatter and when you work with a currency formatter, in this example, since we specified a locale, since we've hard-coded the locale we want to support, we get all that formatting for free. So we automatically get the correct currency symbol, which is going to be a $sign. If something, I know it's hard to believe that something at Nordstrom would cost $1,000 or more, but we get the 1,000 separator, which is going to be a comma, because that's what we use for our region. And then for the decimal character, it's going to be a period as well. So for the most part, you would not want to hard code a locale identifier, but by doing that, it makes you don't need to worry about manually setting up the format. You get that for free. And we talked about that as well. For best practices, anytime you have a hard-coded string, wrap it in the NSLocalized string macro. You don't want to access the NSLocale directly or replace the system localization. You want to basically just let it do the work for you. And with this bullet point, what I mean is don't call upon the NS locale class and then say, okay, what's your current locale? Really don't even worry about that, because to reflect what the system is set up for correctly, just let it do its job. Use base localization for ZIBs and storyboards, and then that way you get a common layout and a default language for free. And again, like I mentioned, if your user has set up their language to be Chinese, for example, and you don't support Chinese, it will go to the base localization, which is typically your development language. Okay, so internationalization best practices. Anytime you're working with anything on the list there, you want to use your NS formatter objects. And basically you set it up once and you never have to think about it again. And just to give some details on the list there, numbers like we talked about, so you don't want to hard code a 1,000 separator or the decimal separator. If you're using a number formatter, it will look at what the system is set up for and then give you the correct characters for that. Also for dates and time format, we talked about that, talked about currency, text direction. There are different sorting rules depending on the region that you're set up for. For the most part, and the general rule is, when you do sorting, it looks at the character value and it sorts based on that, either ascending or descending. And that's going to be that's actually going to be what the Unicode value is for that character, and that's how it'll be sorted. But there are exceptions to that depending on the language. Can't remember exactly, but for example, within if you're sorting something based off English, and it will be sorted alphabetically A through Z, and then any accented characters or higher value Unicode characters will be sorted after that. So you might have an A with an accent, or an A with I don't know exactly what the accent is, but it's I think you'll find it within like the Swedish language. It'll have like a circle. It looks like a circle above the A. So that would be sorted after a Z in English, whereas if you're actually set up for your language to be Swedish, it would be treated differently. And more than likely it would be sorted with the A's as opposed to after a Z. And then also, if you have any kind of special consideration for working with Unicode characters, and thank goodness it's 2016, and for the most part there's blanket support for Unicode characters. But it's something to keep into consideration, because where you might think you have a single character that happens to have an accent, happens to have that glyph on there, that could be a combination of two characters. And so it's just something to keep in mind. The Unicode character would be just that one character represented with a code value. And a combined character would be like a lowercase e with a grave accent on it. So they're actually two separate characters with two separate values, and they've just been combined within the display. Okay, any questions on that? So if we go back to, and let's take a look at that number that I have set up. So right now it's just hard-coded, and we certainly don't want to add it to our strings file depending on, if you're in German, then have a comma for the decimal separator, or if you're in English, have a period for the decimal separator. We want to set up a number formatter to take care of that for us. Now I just have to remember how to do this. Okay. So let's okay. So right now it's a string that I'm working with. So let's say that we've made a call to an API, and what we're actually getting returned is a number object as opposed to a string object. And by doing that, okay, so now I'm working with an actual number, and then I'm going to create a number formatter object with one T this time. Okay, so I have an instance of a number formatter. And now I'm going to set the style for my formatter. And we'll do okay. Oh, we'll look at the style and then decimal style. So if we take a look at this, what we've got available. So I'm looking at decimal style. We also have a currency style, percent style, scientific style, and the other one I want to play with is the spelled out style. Okay. Any questions so far? So again, I'm trying to eliminate my hard-coded string for the number, and then the assumption is I'm making a call to an API, and it's actually returning a number as opposed to a string, and so that's what I'm working with here. So then I create a number formatter, and then I set the style for that number formatter, and then I'm adding extra steps here. You don't need to, but I'm hoping that this will help with clarity. So now I want to, in order to display it on my label, I need to have a string, so I'm going to convert this number to a string. Actually, it's string from number. Yeah. So I want a string from this number. No, that's not right.
You already got the instance of number formatter.
Hmm?
Yeah,
You
have a number
you already cleared number formatter.
Right, right. And it's going to be my Intl number. So now I'll replace this. I'll just comment it out. That. Okay, so far so good? So again, I'm taking this number. I've created an instance of a number formatter, and then I'm going to get a string from that number, and then it's going to apply, since I'm working with the same instance, it's going to apply the formatting to it. At least that's the plan. Let's find out. So there we go. So you recall that the number had no formatting, and then it looked at what the region settings are, and it says, oh, okay, so this is a US region, so for a decimal separator, you need to use a period, and for a thousand separator, you need to use a comma.
So for spelled out, does it really like localize them on the fly?
Let me show you. Okay. And run that. Okay, so it's actually spelled out the number. And you can see my I have not implemented auto layout, so it's going off the screen. What I should do is set and I don't know if you covered this or not, but so I've got a label, and I want to have multi-lines, so I need to set the number of lines to 0 to get that multi-line.
So if you change the language to German, it would be all spelled out in German?
Let's find out.
That's kind of cool. Because that's not a simple word-for-word translation.
Exactly. Yeah. So see, it's like what did I do? I added a number formatter, and it took care of everything for me.
No spaces. That's amazing.
Can you switch back to decimal time?
Mhm.
In German?
So as you can see, for a German region, 1,000 separator is a period, and a decimal separator is a comma. And when you're working with a number formatter, it just looks at the system and it knows what to do. We don't need to specify what languages we want to support, because we did not add French as a language we wanted to support. But if I change it, the number formatter is smart enough to know, oh, in France, a 1,000 separator is, I think, a space, and then the decimal separator is a comma. Just one time. I just added code one time, and now it supports all these regions.
Yeah, because we don't support French. But shouldn't it go to?
Shouldn't it go to the base?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should. That's what I would have expected. It's just like, oh, I'm not localized for French. What's my base? So yeah. So what's the number for radar? Okay. Now, so the option, what I demoed here is I actually working with a number, and then I pulled a string from that number. You can also, if the return value from your API call is text, you can convert that text to a number and then apply your formatter to that. And then yes, you'd need to convert it again from a number to a string to actually display it in your UI. Okay. The last thing I wanted to show you, okay, yeah. So this is based off of the system locale. And I told you what we do at Nordstrom is we actually hard code our locale. So that's what I wanted to demonstrate now and show you how that works. So I'm creating a locale object with an identifier of, okay, just like that. And then I want to apply that to my number formatter.
Why is this a good idea? Because you just told us to let the user return
Oh.
the locale.
It's a good idea when you only want to support certain languages with your formatting. And that's what we do. Since the Nordstrom app only supports one language, then that's the locale that we're going to use.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a real narrow focus, and not necessarily corner cases, but if you have specific needs, that's when you'd want to do this.
So basically, you're not allowing the user to override your locale.
Exactly. And what happened was we did not specify the English locale. I don't need that, do I? So we had a customer call in going, it's like, what's wrong with you guys? Your prices are 100 times more than they are on the web. And it's like, what's going on? You know, and we're looking at API calls and return values, and we're logging things out, and nothing's making any sense. Well, they had set their phone to Hungarian, and Hungarian uses spaces for the decimals. So something that was $75 was appearing as it didn't have a comma, but it appeared as 75 space 00. Because we were looking at the system locale, and it's like, okay, yeah, we'll use that. And then the number formatter said, oh, well, there's no, so the decimal separator character is a space, so that's, I'm just doing what you tell me to do.
That must have been hard to figure out.
I think we just actually caught it. It's like, wait a minute, there's a space here and there should be a period. I think that's the only reason we were able to catch it. So I've created this locale, and now in my number formatter, I can set its locale to that. So now it's just going to strictly use English settings. And if I go back and set this to German, actually French, this will work just as fine. So you recall that with French settings, the thousand separator is a space and the decimal separator is a comma. You can see it's actually using US settings for that. Let me set this back to German. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll set the formatter style to currency style. So we would expect we would expect the currency for German to be either displayed with a euro or some sort of Deutschmark or something like that. But since I've hard-coded it to English settings, we should see a $sign. There we go. So everything's set to German, but the number formatter has been told, regardless of what the system is set for, we're going to use English settings, US settings. So now if I were to come back here and just comment that out and run it, it'll be based off of the system settings. So we got that. Okay. Any questions on that? So there's a number of there's a ton of information we can get from the NSLocale class. And so one of the ones you want to do for your homework is to identify what the quotation marks are for a locale. And we can do that. Show you how to do that. And I'm just going to log some stuff out, so that's why I'm going to throw it down here and get rid of these errors, or warnings, excuse me. So first thing I want to do is grab the current locale. Look to the NSLocale class. grab the current locale. To the current locale, and it's going to have a dictionary of information. So we want to grab the object for key.
We should put period inside parentheses.
Inside?
Yeah, rather than saying
Current locale is in parentheses. Yep.
Current locale is in parentheses. Oh, thank you. And begin. So again, we're set to German, so we should see German quotes printed out. There we go. So with German settings, that's an opening quote, so quote on the left. And then a closing quote. Any questions? Yeah.
Is there any support for trying to do units or measurements?
Yes.
For different
Yeah, and that's another thing to take into consideration. Does it support English units, inches, miles, or does it support the metric system? And that's one thing that the current locale will repeat. It's like, or will report out. And there's some new implementation that I haven't had a chance to play with yet. That came out with OS 9 that understands weights and measures as well.
So you could just put the unit in there like F and then have some lookup or string.
Are you wondering if it would convert the measurements?
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't.
It'll only report back what the region or the locale supports, like if it uses the metric system.
Is there any change in iOS 8?
No. It's a 9 and 10. They included a lot more. And actually, the last slide I have links to the WWDC videos, so you can see exactly what those are. This one I want to call out because it really kind of amazes me. So it's the NS Locale exemplar character set, and what that will deliver, what that reports out, is the basically the simplest way to think about it is like it's like what does the locale what is the language's alphabet? What characters does it use in order to create words and meaning and sentences and things like that? And so I mean that seems really straightforward. It's like, well, of course, you know, if we have if our language is set to English, we're going to have 26 letters. And that's what forms words and meanings and what have you. And then it's the same for basically for all European languages that you'll see those. And Where it gets really interesting is you can also get a character set if you're working with an Asian language, be it like if Thai or Chinese or Japanese, where it's not individual characters that are combined to create words, but you have ideographs that represent meanings and words and things like that. So I just think it's amazing that this is just all available and it's all built in. Okay, so any questions? Want to go ahead and take a 10-minute break, then come back and talk about accessibility.